My name is Gabriel Williams, though these days people just call me Gabe. I'm 62 years old, and after the accident that put me in this wheelchair, I thought the hardest part of my life was learning how to move again. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning I had become a secret. For months, my daughter Natalie crafted excuse after excuse to avoid me. Canceled dinners. Accidentally missed calls. A mysterious fiancé, Simon, whose face I only knew from a photo she swore she sent to the wrong number. I convinced myself she was just protecting my peace, but a father's instinct always knows a lie. Then came the morning of her big promotion ceremony. My wife, Charlotte, forgot to tell me it was today. She slipped out of the house with a smile, and a story about a sudden dentist appointment. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my old friend, Jasmine, and her words shattered the last of my denial. "Gabe," she said, "why aren't you here? Natalie's about to give her speech. She told everyone you were too ill to come." So I made a choice. If my daughter was ashamed of the man in the wheelchair, then she would meet the father who once carried her on his shoulders. Not the quiet, broken man they thought they could hide, but the man who taught her to be brave. What happened when I rolled into that ballroom? Let's just say the applause died in their throats, and my daughter learned you can't erase the man who gave you your name. Before I tell you what I did next, and the single sentence I spoke that brought the entire room to a standstill, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you're new here, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell, because in this family, nobody gets left behind. Now, let me tell you my story. They say your life flashes before your eyes. For me, it wasn't the accident that did it. It was the silence that came after. My life now is measured in the space between the floor and my eye line. I used to be 6'2". I used to look men in the eye when I shook their hands. A firm, honest grip, the kind that built a construction business from a single truck and a mountain of debt. My hands were my pride. They could read a blueprint, cradle my newborn daughters, and frame a house all in the same week. Now, they spend most of their time tracing the cold, metallic rims of these wheels. The accident was a cliché I never saw coming. A rainy night, a deer leaping from the woods on Route 17, the sickening skid, the crunch of metal against an old oak tree. They told me I was lucky to be alive. In the hospital, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and pity, I remember thinking the fight was physical. Learning to sit up again, to transfer from bed to chair, to navigate a world that suddenly had so many stairs. But the real injury was subtler. It was a fracture in the foundation of my own home. When I was finally discharged, the house felt different. Charlotte had installed ramps, God bless her. She'd widened doorways, but she'd also moved things. My favorite armchair was gone. She said it was in the way. The framed photos from my job sites, me standing on steel girders, shaking hands with the mayor, were now tucked away on a high shelf, gathering dust. Out of sight, out of mind. My daughter, Natalie, my firstborn, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest, visited the first week. She fussed with my blanket, adjusted my pillows, her movements quick and nervous. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she'd ask, but her eyes were on her phone, scrolling through a world that was moving on without me. "I'm still here, Nat," I wanted to say. "The same man who taught you to parallel park is trapped in this chair." But I didn't. I saw the new, fragile distance in her eyes, and I mistook it for care. I thought she was protecting me, shielding her invincible father from the brutal reality of his own fragility. So I started to make excuses for them. For her canceled visits, I told myself she was busy, a rising star at her firm. For Charlotte's new habit of speaking for me, finishing my sentences in social situations, I told myself she was just trying to help. But at night, in the crushing quiet of our bedroom, I'd lie awake and listen to the sound of my own heartbeat. The hands that built empires now lay flat on the mattress, useless. I'd close my eyes and feel the ghost of a handshake, the phantom weight of a hammer. I was becoming a curator of my own memories, a ghost in the museum of my former life. And I was starting to fear that the people I loved most were the ones who were turning out the lights. The excuses began to crystallize, each one a perfect polished stone adding to the wall between us. It started with Sunday dinners, a tradition for 20 years. Roast chicken, too much gravy, and the girls fighting over the last biscuit. First, Natalie canceled because of a last-minute work emergency. The following week, it was a migraine. The week after that, there was no reason at all, just a text. "Sorry, Dad, can't make it tonight." The silence from her was a physical ache. My phone, which used to buzz with her calls asking for advice, now lay dormant. When I called her, it often went to voicemail. "Accidentally on silent," she'd text later. "So sorry." Then there was Simon. She mentioned him casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "Oh, Simon thinks that new Italian place is overrated." Or, "Simon and I are thinking of going to the coast for the weekend." A name with no face. A shadow in my daughter's life. "When do I get to meet this Simon?" I asked one evening, trying to keep my voice light. "I'd like to shake the hand of the man who's stealing my daughter's heart." There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a fraction of a second too long. "Soon, Dad, I promise. He's just incredibly busy. You know how it is." I did know. I knew what it was like to build a life. But I also knew that when a man is serious about a woman, he meets her family. He looks her father in the eye. A few days later, my phone chimed with a photo. It was Natalie, her head thrown back in laughter, her face glowing. She was leaning against a tall, broad-shouldered man with a confident smile. Simon. But his face was turned slightly away, blurred, as if caught in motion. It was a beautiful photo, but it felt staged. The text came immediately. "Oops, sent that to the wrong number. That was for Madeline." My blood ran cold. Sent to the wrong number. I stared at the message. My contact name in her phone was Dad. Madeline's, her sister, was surely Maddie or something similar. They weren't even close. The lie was so flimsy it was an insult. That's when the real suspicion took root. A dark, thorny vine twisting around my heart. This wasn't about protecting my peace. This was something else. I began to notice things. The way Charlotte would retreat to the garden to take phone calls, her voice a low, urgent murmur. The way she'd quickly change the subject whenever I brought up Natalie or the future. Our home, once my fortress, was now a place of unspoken tensions and hidden conversations. I was the elephant in the room, or, more precisely, the elephant in the wheelchair. And my family was slowly, carefully building a new room around me, one where I was no longer a central feature, but a piece of furniture to be worked around. The walls, quite literally, began to close in. It was Charlotte who started the redecorating. She called it freshening up the place, but it felt more like an exorcism. My presence was being systematically erased, room by room. She started with the study, my old study. It had been my sanctuary with its large oak desk, my blueprint tubes in a stand, the smell of old paper and coffee. One Tuesday, a man named Liam arrived. He was young, dressed in tight black clothes, and spoke with a soft, deliberate voice that made everything sound like a question. "An interior designer," Charlotte said, to make the place more accessible and modern. I watched from the hallway as Liam and Charlotte stood in the doorway of my study. "We need to declutter to maximize the flow," Liam said, his eyes scanning the room with clinical detachment. "And this desk, it's a real statement piece, but it's a monster. It blocks the energy." My desk. The one I'd found at a flea market and refinished myself. The one where I'd helped Natalie with her algebra homework. It was a monster that blocked the energy. By the end of the week, it was gone, replaced by a small, sleek glass table that looked like it would shatter if you breathed on it too hard. My blueprint tubes were replaced by a single white orchid. The room was no longer mine. It was a showroom. It was staged. The word echoed in my mind. Staged. You stage a house for potential buyers. You present a perfect, neutral, empty canvas so someone else can imagine their life in it. A cold dread settled deep in my bones. Who were they staging it for? The changes weren't just aesthetic. They were strategic. The rug in the living room, the one I'd tripped on once with my chair, was removed, exposing the cold, hard hardwood. The family photos on the mantelpiece were rearranged. The ones with me in them, especially the recent ones with the wheelchair, were moved to the back, replaced by older photos of just Charlotte and the girls, or new, glossy portraits of Natalie. I felt like a prisoner being gently, politely, prepared for a transfer to a different facility. Every improvement was another lock on a door I hadn't realized was closing. One afternoon, I rolled into the kitchen to find Charlotte and Liam leaning over a floor plan of the house. "And this wall," Liam was saying, tapping the paper. "If we open this up, it completely changes the sightlines from the foyer. It's what modern buyers are looking for." Buyers. The word hung in the air, toxic and final. Charlotte saw me and snapped the portfolio shut, a bright, false smile plastered on her face. "Gabe, we were just talking about maybe letting in more light." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, this woman I'd shared a bed with for 35 years, and I saw a stranger. The house wasn't being staged for a buyer. I was the one being staged out. My own life was being carefully, cruelly edited around me, and the final cut was coming. I could feel it. The morning of the promotion ceremony dawned bright and clear, a mockingly beautiful day. I knew what it was. I'd seen the embossed invitation weeks ago, peeking out from under a stack of mail. The Grand Royal Hotel, celebrating the promotion of Natalie Williams to vice president. I'd said nothing, waiting to see if I would be invited. The silence from both my wife and daughter was the answer. I watched Charlotte get ready. It was a ritual of meticulous betrayal. She took longer than usual, applying her makeup with a surgeon's precision. She emerged from her walk-in closet not in her usual slacks and blouse, but in a sleek, navy blue dress I'd never seen before. It was elegant, severe, and looked expensive. Then she opened her jewelry box and took out the emerald necklace. My breath caught in my throat. I'd given that to her on our 30th anniversary, after a year of secretly setting aside money from a particularly tough job. "For the woman who is my foundation," I'd told her, my voice thick with emotion as I clasped it around her neck. She'd cried. We'd danced in our kitchen to a song only we could hear. Now she fastened it coolly around her own neck, the green stones catching the light. She was weaponizing our history, dressing for her role in my erasure. "You look very formal for a dentist appointment," I said, my voice carefully neutral from my seat by the window. She jumped, as if she'd forgotten I was there. She turned, that practiced, placating smile already in place. "Oh, it's not just the dentist, honey. There's a small luncheon afterward, for the hospital auxiliary. I told you about it." She hadn't. Every word was a tiny, polished marble of falsehood. "Ah," I said, nodding slowly. "The hospital auxiliary? Of course." She bustled over, the scent of her perfume, a fragrance I'd bought her for decades, now smelling like poison. She kissed my forehead, a dry, swift peck. "I shouldn't be too long. There's leftover meatloaf in the fridge for your lunch." Leftover meatloaf. While she would be eating canapés at the Grand Royal. She smoothed my collar, a gesture that once spoke of intimacy and now felt like she was tidying a piece of furniture. "You rest today, Gabe. Don't overdo it." And with that, she was gone. The front door clicked shut with a sound of terrifying finality. The house plunged into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a second of my life being stolen from me. I was alone, deliberately, calculatedly alone, left with my leftover meatloaf and the ghost of a promise made over emeralds. The emeralds were now a lie. The promise was dust. The 5 minutes after Charlotte left stretched into an eternity. I sat in the silence, the image of her in that dress, wearing that necklace, burning behind my eyes. The staged house, the canceled dinners, the mysterious Simon, it all coalesced into a single crushing weight on my chest. This wasn't just exclusion. It was a coordinated campaign. Then the phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the quiet, making me jump. I let it ring 3 times, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who would be calling? Charlotte, to check on her sick husband. A telemarketer? I almost didn't answer, but something, some last frayed thread of hope, made me wheel over to the side table and pick up the receiver. Gabe? Gabe, is that you? It was a woman's voice, familiar, laced with warmth and a current of confusion. Jasmine. My old friend, my most trusted project manager for 20 years. The one person from my old life who still called just to talk, who never treated me like an invalid. Jasmine, I said, my voice rough with unused emotion. Yeah, it's me. Where are you? She asked, her tone genuinely perplexed. The ceremony is about to start. They're serving champagne and everyone's milling about. Natalie looks stunning, by the way. A little nervous, but stunning. I felt the room tilt, the champagne, the milling crowd. It was real, and it was happening right now. Jasmine, I said slowly, each word a struggle. What ceremony? There was a beat of dead air on the line. I could picture her face, the cheerful confusion melting into dawning horror. The promotion ceremony, Gabe. For Natalie, at the Grand Royale. I'm looking at the program right now. She gives her speech in 10 minutes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Oh, Gabe, you didn't know. The truth, cold and sharp, finally pierced the last of my denial. I had been hoping for a different, less cruel reason. Maybe a surprise party for me later. Something. Anything. But this. Charlotte said she had a dentist appointment, I mumbled, the excuse sounding as pathetic and hollow as it was. Hold on. If you're still watching, do me a quick favor. Tap like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You're going to want to hear the next part, because this is where the secrets start cracking open. Now, let's continue. Jasmine's next words were gentle, but they landed like physical blows. Gabe, honey. No. Everyone is here. Charlotte is here. She's sitting at the front table with a very handsome young man. I assume that's Simon? And Gabe? She hesitated, her voice thick with pity and rage. Natalie was talking to her boss earlier. I heard her. She said you were having a particularly bad spell with your health, that the crowd and the noise would be too much for you. She said you sent your love. Sent my love. The final piece of the betrayal snapped into place. They hadn't just hidden the event from me. They had crafted a narrative for their colleagues and friends. They had painted me as the frail, sickly father, too fragile to be present, generously sending his love from a sickbed they had constructed for me in their story. They had made me a pitiable footnote in my own daughter's success story. The last vestige of the man I used to be crumbled into ash. I wasn't just hurt. I was annihilated. Thank you, Jasmine, I whispered, my voice trembling with a fury so pure it felt like clarity. Thank you for telling me. Gabe, what are you going to do? She asked, her voice full of worry. I looked across the room, my gaze settling on the hallway that led to my bedroom, to my closet, to the suit that hung there, waiting. I'm going to get dressed, I said, and hung up the phone. The whir of my wheelchair seemed louder than usual as I moved down the hallway, a purposeful hum cutting through the oppressive silence. I pushed open the door to my bedroom and rolled to the back of the walk-in closet. There, shrouded in a clean white garment bag, was my armor. It was a suit I'd had tailor-made for my final multi-million-dollar project bid, the one that had secured my company's future and my comfortable retirement. Charcoal gray, Italian wool, cut for the shoulders of a man who carried the weight of hundreds of jobs. I reached up, my hands no longer trembling, and unzipped the bag. The smell of cedar and ambition wafted out. It was the scent of the man I was before the oak tree on Route 17. Getting dressed was a battle, a slow, deliberate campaign. Each movement was a reclaiming of territory. Swinging my legs from the chair to the bed, wrestling off my soft, shapeless sweater. The shirt was first, stiff, white cotton. Buttoning each cuff was an act of defiance. The trousers were harder, requiring leverage and grit, but I managed, my knuckles white with the effort. Then the suit jacket. I stood, balancing precariously on unfeeling legs, holding onto the closet doorframe. I shrugged it on. It was loose across the chest and shoulders. The body that had filled it out was gone, wasted away from months of inactivity. But it didn't matter. The structure of the wool, the sharp line of the lapel, it gave me back my shape. It gave me back my silhouette. I looked in the full-length mirror. The man staring back was a stranger, yet more familiar than the one I'd seen for the past year. His eyes, which had been clouded with confusion and hurt, were now clear and hard, like chips of flint. The wheelchair was there, a part of the picture, but it no longer defined the man sitting in it. He was dressed for a boardroom, not a sick room. I wheeled to the bathroom and shaved, the scrape of the razor a sharp, clean sound. I wetted my hair and combed it back, the way I used to wear it. The final touch was my watch, a solid, silver timepiece my crew had given me. It was heavy on my wrist. An anchor. There was no rage left. The cold fire had burned it all away, leaving behind a core of glacial calm. This wasn't about causing a scene. This was about bearing witness. This was about forcing them to see. I was not showing up as Gabe, the poor man in the wheelchair. I was showing up as Gabriel Williams, founder, CEO, father. I took out my phone and called for a premium car service, the one with accessible vehicles. My voice was steady, commanding. I need to go to the Grand Royal Hotel. Immediately. As I waited by the front door, I looked around the staged, sterile living room. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a set, and I was about to walk onto a different stage entirely. My reflection in the dark glass of the storm door was a ghost from the past, superimposed on the ghost of my present. I was neither. I was something new, something they had created, a quiet force of reckoning, dressed in wool and resolve. The ride to the Grand Royal was a silent, rolling meditation. The driver, a young man named Ben, was respectfully quiet. He saw a well-dressed man in a wheelchair going to a hotel, not a tragedy or a secret. His normalcy was a balm. We pulled under the glittering porte cochere. The hotel was a monument to everything Natalie valued. Polished marble, gleaming brass, a hushed atmosphere of exclusive importance. Ben helped me out. "You sure you're good, sir?" he asked. "I've never been better," I said, and I almost meant it. The ballroom was on the mezzanine level. I found the elevator, a gilded cage, and rose up, my stomach doing a slow, steady roll. When the doors slid open, the sound hit me first. It was the sound of my exclusion. The low, happy hum of a crowd, the clink of glasses, the sound of my daughter's world celebrating without me. The ballroom doors were massive, made of dark, heavy wood, flanked by 2 staff members. One of them, a young woman with a clipboard, saw me and moved to block my path, a polite, professional smile on her face. "Sir, this is a private event. May I see your invitation?" I looked past her, through the small glass window in the door. I could see the back of the room, rows of well-dressed people, and at the far end, a raised podium with a microphone. And there she was. Natalie. My Natalie. Her back was to me, but I'd know the slope of her shoulders anywhere. She was adjusting the mic, preparing to speak. "I'm family," I said to the woman, my voice low but leaving no room for argument. Her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir, but the list is very specific." "It's all right, Steph." An older manager had appeared, his eyes widening slightly as he took me in. The suit, the chair, the unshakable calm on my face. He had seen my picture in the business section of the paper years ago. He recognized me. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the woman. Let him through. The woman with the clipboard stepped aside, confusion on her face. This was it, the point of no return. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of this new, decisive man. I could feel the eyes of the staff on my back. I leaned forward and pushed. Before I continue, take 1 second to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because what comes next shocked everyone in that auditorium, including me. All right, let's get back to it. The heavy door swung open without a sound. I crossed the threshold. The room was vast, opulent, bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers. I was at the very back. For a few seconds I was just a shadow in the doorway. Then I began to move. The whir of my motorized chair was soft, but in the lull before Natalie's speech, it was unmistakable. A few heads at the back tables turned, then a few more. A ripple of attention moved through the crowd like a wave. I kept my eyes locked on the podium. I moved steadily down the center aisle, a slow, deliberate procession. The conversations began to stutter and die. The clinking of glasses ceased. I saw faces I recognized, old colleagues, clients I'd drunk with, friends who had been to my home. Their expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, to dawning recognition, and finally to stunned disbelief. I was halfway down the aisle when Natalie, sensing the shift in the room's energy, turned from the microphone to see what was happening. I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was beautiful, radiant, and in that instant, as her eyes met mine, her face went through a devastating transformation. The confident smile froze, then shattered. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. Her skin paled. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Her ghost. At the front table, Charlotte half rose from her seat, her hand flying to the emerald necklace at her throat. Her mouth was a perfect, shocked O. Next to her, a handsome, dark-haired man, Simon, looked from me to Natalie, his face a mask of confusion. The room was now utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. The only sound was the quiet, persistent whir of my chair as I completed my journey down the aisle, coming to a stop directly in front of the podium, in the space reserved for no one. I looked up at my daughter. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My presence was the entire speech. The whir of the chair was the only whisper, and it was screaming her betrayal to the entire, silent room. The silence in the ballroom was a physical presence, thick and heavy, pressing down on everyone. It was the sound of 100 people holding their breath, 100 social masks cracking at once. All eyes were on the two of us, the daughter at the podium, frozen in the spotlight, and the father in the wheelchair below, shrouded in the shadow she had cast. Natalie's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The confident vice president was gone, replaced by a little girl who'd been caught in a terrible lie. Her gaze darted from me to the crowd, to her mother, a silent, panicked plea for someone to fix this, to make the apparition before her disappear. But I was real. The whir of my chair had been the only sound, and now its silence was even louder. From the corner of my eye, I saw Charlotte. She was still half standing, her knuckles white as she gripped the tablecloth. The emerald necklace seemed to burn against her skin, a brand of her betrayal. Simon was whispering urgently to her, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me, her expression a turbulent sea of guilt, fear, and a shocking flicker of anger. "How dare you?" her eyes seemed to say. "How dare you ruin this?" That flicker of anger was the final confirmation I needed. There would be no apology here, no moment of tearful reconciliation. This was a war of perception, and they had declared it. Natalie finally found her voice, a thin, reedy thing that cracked in the middle. "Dad." "What? What are you doing here?" It was the wrong thing to say. It confirmed her guilt for the entire room. A man shouldn't have to explain his presence at his own daughter's celebration. I didn't answer her. Instead, I slowly, deliberately scanned the faces in the front row, the senior partners, the big clients, the people whose opinion Natalie valued above all else. I made eye contact with a few of them, my gaze steady, devoid of plea or pity. I was simply letting them see me. The man they'd been told was too frail to attend. Then I turned my attention back to Natalie. I gave her a small, sad smile. It wasn't the smile of a broken man. It was the smile of a father who was profoundly, irreparably disappointed. I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and carried effortlessly in the dead silence. It was not the voice of an invalid. It was the voice of a CEO addressing his board. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become, Natalie," I said, each word measured and precise. "I've always taught you that integrity is the foundation of true success." I let that word hang in the air for a beat. Integrity. "I just wish you weren't so ashamed of the man who taught you that." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the room. It was an accusation, but it was delivered as a father's lament. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. I didn't stop. I pivoted my chair just enough to face the front table. My eyes locked with Charlotte's. Her face was a ghastly white. "And Charlotte, my love," I said, my tone shifting, becoming colder, laced with a razor's edge of irony, "you should have told me you were bringing a date to our daughter's event." I let my gaze drift meaningfully to Simon, who looked as if he'd been struck. "I would have wished you both well." The silence shattered. A wave of gasps and frantic hushed whispers erupted. The carefully constructed narrative of the frail, absent father and the dutiful, supportive family evaporated in an instant, replaced by the scandalous reality of a betrayed husband and a ashamed daughter. I had not shouted. I had not cried. I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection I showed the room was ugly. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look at Natalie again. I had said all I needed to say. With a quiet, deliberate touch on the joystick, I turned my chair around, its soft whir once again the only sound cutting through the chaos of whispers. I began the long, slow journey back up the aisle. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes fixed on the doors at the back, the sunlight streaming through them like a promise. I could feel their stares on my back, Natalie's horror, Charlotte's fury, the crowd's morbid fascination. But for the first time in a year, I didn't feel their shame. I felt only my own power. I had taken their secret and, with 2 sentences, turned it into my strength. The revenge was not in my arrival, but in my dignified, unassailable exit. I did not go home. The car service took me to a small, furnished apartment in a quiet, modern complex downtown. I had rented it 2 months prior, paying in cash. It was an impulse born of that gut-deep instinct, a silent rebellion against the staged house and the feeling of being a guest in my own life. I told Charlotte it was a private office space, a place to get my thoughts in order. She'd barely acknowledged it, likely relieved I had a place to go that wasn't under her feet. Now it was my sanctuary, my bunker. The apartment was bland, beige, and anonymous. It held no memories, good or bad. It was a blank slate. As Ben, the driver, helped me inside, the silence felt different from the one in my house. This was a peaceful silence, a silence I owned. My phone began to vibrate incessantly, buzzing on the glass coffee table like an angry hornet. Charlotte, Natalie, Charlotte, Natalie. I watched it dance, the screen flashing with their names, their panic a distant echo from a world I had just left. I did not answer. The power had shifted. Let them wait. Let them wonder. I turned on the television, not to watch but for the noise. The impersonal hum of a news anchor was a comfort. I sat in my suit, in the quiet of my new home, and I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply existed, feeling the solid ground of my own decisions beneath me for the first time in a year. A few hours later, a different name flashed on my screen. Emily, my younger daughter, the free spirit, the artist, the one who had always clashed with Natalie's corporate ambition and Charlotte's need for control. We'd grown closer after my accident, bound by our shared status as outsiders in our own family. I answered, "Dad?" Her voice was small, trembling with emotion. "Oh my God, Dad, is it true?" "What did you hear, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice weary but calm. Jasmine called me. She told me everything. About the ceremony. What you did. She took a shaky breath. Natalie called me right after, sobbing, saying you'd humiliated her in front of everyone. That you'd ruined her life. I felt a pang, not of guilt, but of sorrow. Sorrow that her first instinct was to play the victim. "I didn't ruin her life, Emily," I said softly. "I just refused to let her ruin mine." There was a silence on the other end, and then a sound that surprised me, a choked laugh. "Jasmine said you were magnificent. She said you were like a king, that the room was too afraid to even breathe." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that day. "I just showed up, honey. That's all." "Where are you?" she asked, her voice now firm, protective. "You're not at that house, are you?" "No. I'm somewhere safe." "Good, stay there. I'm coming. Don't argue with me." She hung up before I could respond. 40 minutes later, she was at my door, her arms laden with groceries and her eyes blazing with a fierce, loving fire. She didn't ask for explanations. She just hugged me, a long, tight hug that felt like an anchor in a stormy sea. "They've been like this for months, Dad," she said later, as she made us tea in the small kitchen. "Talking about selling the house, about how difficult you've become. Natalie was obsessed with how it would look to her new boss, having a father in a wheelchair. She called you a liability." She spat the word out like it was poison. Hearing it confirmed so bluntly was like a final, clean incision, cutting away the last infected tissue of doubt. It hurt, but it was a healing hurt. As we sat together in the quiet beige apartment, a profound sense of peace settled over me. My family had not just shrunk, it had been refined. It had been distilled down to its purest, most loyal element. The house on the hill with its staged rooms and whispered lies could burn down for all I cared. My home was right here, in this simple room, with my daughter who saw me not as a burden or a secret, but simply as her dad. The fallout was swift and absolute. Charlotte's lawyer called the next day. I had my own on retainer, a pit bull of a man named Roberts who had handled my business contracts for decades. The divorce proceedings began with cold efficiency. The staging of the house was used as evidence of her intent to liquidate our shared assets. The emerald necklace was returned to me in a small, unmarked box. I gave it to Emily. Natalie never apologized. She sent a long, furious email, detailing how I had sabotaged her career, how her colleagues now looked at her with pity and suspicion. I did not respond. Her words were the thrashings of a person who could only see the world through the lens of her own ambition. I had mourned the loss of that daughter months ago, in the silence of all those canceled dinners. My revenge was not in a single dramatic moment in a ballroom. My revenge was my life, lived well. Jasmine, true to her word, became my lieutenant. She put out feelers to my old network. The story of what happened at the Grand Royal had spread, not as a scandal, but as a legend. They didn't talk about the man in the wheelchair. They talked about Gabriel Williams, who'd stared down his own family in a room full of the city's elite without raising his voice. Offers for consultancy work trickled in at first, then became a steady stream. Older businessmen, men who understood legacy and loyalty, wanted my advice. They wanted my nerve. I started Williams Legacy Consultants, operating from my apartment. My first client was a former rival, a man who said, "I heard what you did, Gabe. I need that kind of steel on my team." Emily moved in with me, not out of pity, but as a partner. She handled my scheduling, my correspondence, her artistic eye bringing warmth and life to the beige apartment. Our home was filled with her paintings, her music, and the smell of real food cooking. It was alive. One afternoon, about 6 months after the ceremony, I was reviewing site plans for a new waterfront development. The sun was streaming into the apartment, illuminating the detailed drawings. My hands, tracing the lines of a foundation, no longer felt useless. They were directing millions of dollars of investment, shaping the city's skyline once more. I looked out the window, at the city sprawling below me. I was no longer looking up at it from the confined view of my old house. I was in it, a part of it. The doorbell rang. It was a courier with a large, flat package. Inside was a simple, elegant drafting table made of solid oak. The note attached was from my entire old crew, their names signed in a familiar, messy scrawl. "For the boss," it read. "The job site isn't the same without you, but we're glad you're still building." I ran my hand over the smooth, solid wood. It was real. It wouldn't block the energy. It was energy. I thought of Natalie, probably in a glass-walled office somewhere, chasing a title that would never fill the hole her choices had carved. I thought of Charlotte, living in a half-empty staged house with a man who had witnessed her cruelty. I felt no hatred, only a distant, quiet pity. They had tried to hide me away, to make me small and quiet. In doing so, they had given me the one thing I needed to become whole again, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. My name is Gabriel Williams. I am a father, a businessman, and a man who learned that his foundation was not in a house or in his legs, but in his character. They broke my heart, and from the pieces, I built something stronger. My family is smaller now, but its foundation is unshakable. And every day, from my desk by the window, I continue to draw my blueprints, not just for buildings, but for the rest of my life. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because this channel is a family, and every story brings us closer. See you in the next one.